Ragnar Lothbrok is one of the most famous of the names to emerge from the Viking period, though his true origins are still not fully understood. He appears in legends and sagas and in scattered chronicles across Europe, with a trail of myth and possibility. He is in some accounts a bold raider and king who traveled very far beyond the shores of Scandinavia to distant kingdoms. They also portray him as a tragic figure whose life was defined by prophecy, ambition, family loyalty, and the shifting sea, the Viking Age. Itself was a time of exploration, trade, and violence marked by long sea voyages into unexplored waters. Men like Ragnar are said to have led their people not only in war, but through shifting landscapes of politics and survival. His legend blends what are perhaps flashes of true accomplishment with the created tales of poets and bards down the centuries. He is connected to great sons, to great English and French wars, and to dramatic scenes with pride and pathos from Ragnar's legend, we glimpse also something of the larger framework of Viking society. From chieftains and jarls to peasants and thralls, we catch a glimpse of their ships, their rituals, their knowledge of destiny, and their equivocal tie to gods and earthly authority. This story reaches back into the sagas of Iceland and Frankish monk records, across borders made by swords and storms. Though the particulars differ from version to version, the figure of Ragnar remains constant, enigmatic, and unforgettable. Understanding his tale involves going slowly through Viking life, mythic memory, and recorded history merged into one path. And doing so brings us nearer not only to Ragnar himself, but to the men who wrote his world and kept his tale alive. Imagine a land shaped by the cold breath of the north and the ever-moving rhythm of sea and sky, where the sun rises slowly over endless forests and falls beneath distant hills wrapped in mist. This is the place where the Vikings lived, a world carved out of rock soil and ancient waters. Their homes rose from the gifts of nature, sturdy walls of timber and stone holding out the biting chill. Turf roofs, thick with moss and grass, kept warmth inside, while thin smoke curled lazily through simple chimneys. Inside, long wooden benches lined rough walls. Heavy tables bore the everyday tools of labor and life. The fire was the heart of each home, crackling softly, sending flickering shadows dancing across worn faces. Around it, families gathered, sharing stories, songs, and the slow, comforting rhythms of daily routine. The scent of burning wood, mixed with earth sweat and fresh-baked bread, filled the cool northern air. Men and women worked side by side, tending fields where hardy crops struggled under short, fleeting summers. Barley, rye, and oats rose slowly under cool skies, feeding people and livestock alike through long winters. The soil was stubborn, rocky often, but careful hands coaxed life. From it, year after year, in quiet persistence, children played near the forest edge, their laughter weaving with birdsong and the whisper of leaves. They learned early the skills of survival, tracking animals, gathering berries, respecting the land's endless gifts. Their world was smaller than ours, but every tree, rock, and stream held deep meaning, memory, and story. Fishing was another vital thread woven into the fabric of daily life. Nets cast in calm, sheltered bays, spears raised beside cold, rushing rivers, fish salted, dried, preserved to carry the promise of food through cold months. The sea was provider and boundary, a vast unknown, promising wealth, yet demanding deep respect and caution. Craftsmanship shaped the Vikings' skilled hands, forged sharp edges on axes, knives, and tools. Delicate weaving of cloth and leather crafting of household items carried tradition passed down with care. The work was steady, slow, precise, a quiet rhythm linking past to present through every finished piece. Peace evenings brought gatherings where stories were told by firelight voices, low, steady as the night deepened. Tales of gods, giants, and heroes blended with accounts of journeys far away and quiet joys of family. Music from simple flutes or strings floated softly, weaving another layer into the fabric of their lives. The turning seasons marked time itself. A calendar set by nature. Farmers and fishermen lived by these laws. Winter was long, dark, a time of rest and repair. Summer brought busy work in fields, forests, and boats. This cycle shaped food festivals, quiet prayers, bursts of community celebration, and shared hope. Imagine walking slowly through a village, feeling rough wood beneath your fingers, hearing fire crackle, cool air carrying scents of pine smoke and earth, as neighbors greet one another with quiet smiles, nods. Life was hard, uncertain, yet filled with small moments of peace, connection, and quiet strength beyond the farms. The forest stretched deep, a place both feared and respected, full of game berries and mystery. Hunters knew the silent paths, learning how to move, unseen how to watch and wait for the fleeting moment. Each season brought new challenges, food to find shelter to secure, and threats to be cautious of. The animals of the north held special place in Viking life: bears, wolves, eagles, and mighty stags. Some were hunted for food or fur, others woven into myths, stories. Told around fires on long winter nights, the wild was never just a place, but part of the spirit, part of the endless dance between man and earth. The villages were small clusters of wooden homes grouped near fresh water and fertile land. Neighbors shared labor and stories, often gathering for meals, celebrations, and communal work. Though isolated by distance, the bonds were strong, and daily life depended on this quiet cooperation. Pottery was simple, yet sturdy vessels, shaped by hands skilled in their craft, holding water, food, and drink. Woodworking extended beyond homes to include boats, sleds, and tools vital for survival and travel. Every crafted object was a thread in the tapestry of Viking life, reflecting culture, function, and artistry. Food preparation was a daily ritual, from grinding grain to smoking fish and curing meats. Meals were often simple, hearty, consisting of porridge, bread, cheese, and preserved vegetables. Feasts were rarer occasions marked by shared stories, music, and the warmth of gathered kin. Clothing was practical, woven from wool and linen, dyed with natural colors, and trimmed with simple embroidery. Layers protected from cold winds, while leather boots and cloaks guarded against rain and snow. Each item carried both utility and a quiet expression of identity and status within the community. Children were taught from birth the values of courage, skill, and respect for tradition. Play was also learning time, where games mimicked adult tasks, sharpening minds and bodies alike. Elders held knowledge sacred, passing down wisdom stories and guidance, ensuring continuity through time. Trade was a thread weaving Viking villages to the wider world. Items like furs, amber, and crafted goods traveled far, exchanged for silver, spices, and other treasures. This exchange brought new ideas, goods, and connections. Linking distant lands in subtle, quiet ways, religion and belief were woven into daily rhythms. Gods and spirits shaped understanding of fate, life, and death. Offerings, prayers, and rituals marked the changing seasons' moments of joy and grief. This world was one of balance, survival, and meaning, a place where each day was hard-earned, yet filled with moments of quiet beauty. Where people lived close to the land, sea, and sky, in a steady, slow rhythm shaped by nature and time. Villages stretched along the shorelines nestled between forest and fjord, where the sound of water lapping met the call of seabirds, and wooden docks reached into calm waters. Longships rested, waiting for the call of distant horizons or the chance to carry goods. These communities were woven tightly together, bound by blood trade and shared toil, their lives intertwined in countless ways. Every home was built with care, using timber from surrounding forests and stone from rocky hills. Often gathered by neighbors working side by side, they shared not only land, but stories, songs, and the long rhythms of daily labor, crafting a quiet network of connection that stretched beyond the trees and waves. Women played central roles, managing households, weaving cloth, and preparing food, their hands skilled at many tasks. Spinning thread from flax and wool was a daily chore, their fingers moving in practiced rhythms, producing fabric for clothes and sails. They also cared for children, tended gardens, and preserved food in ways passed down through generations with quiet pride. These tasks required patience and strength, for preparing for long winters was never a simple affair. The turning of flax into fine thread, or the careful smoking of fish, was essential for survival, and carried with it the legacy of countless ancestors who had lived by these same methods. Men balanced farming with hunting and fishing, venturing into forests or out to sea to gather what the land could not provide. The forest was a source of timber, firewood, and game wolves and bears. Proud beneath the trees, demanding respect and caution, fishermen cast nets from small boats, or stood on rocky shores spearing fish in rivers and tidal pools. The sea was a constant companion. The skill needed to read the tides and weather was learned through years of watching the horizon and listening to the whispers of wind and water. These skills were passed from father to son, from uncle to nephew, forming bonds of trust and tradition. Craftsmen and smiths were the quiet heroes, shaping tools, weapons, and household items that made survival possible. Blacksmiths worked with iron heat, glowing softly as they hammered blades, axes, nails, and delicate jewelry pieces. Carpenters shaped wood for homes, ships, and furniture each stroke. Steady, precise, connecting past to present. Their work was painstaking and slow, but necessary for every journey, every meal. Every moment of warmth depended on the strength and skill embedded in these crafted objects. Each hammer strike was a beat in the ongoing song of life sustained by fire and sweat. Trade was a thread that stretched far beyond the village boundaries. Vikings exchanged furs, amber, and crafted goods. They welcomed traders from distant lands. Silver coins, spices, and new ideas flowed quietly through these northern outposts. Markets were lively places of exchange, but also of stories, news, and the subtle weaving of alliances and rivalries. Merchants traveled great distances, sometimes risking storms and hostile shores to bring goods from lands known and unknown. This exchange was not just of objects, but of culture, weaving Vikings into a larger world beyond fjords and forests. Community gatherings were moments of rest and celebration. Families came together, sharing food, music, and tales. Storytelling was a revered art. The sagas passed from mouth to ear, weaving history, myth, and moral lessons. Songs accompanied by simple instruments brought life to these gatherings. Voices rose and fell like the waves outside. These evenings were times to connect and remember, to honor ancestors, and to weave the threads of identity tighter together. Each tale told was a link in the chain of memory, binding past, present, and future. Children learned their roles through observation, play, and gentle instruction. Respect for elders and the land was taught. Games imitated adult tasks, helping sharpen skills needed for hunting, farming, or fighting when the time came. The passing of knowledge was slow, patient, and deliberate, ensuring the continuation of culture and survival. Each generation grew into the world shaped by its predecessors, learning to listen to the land and sea, to read the skies and rivers, and to walk paths carved by those who came before. Spiritual beliefs formed an invisible thread running through the fabric of daily life. Gods and spirits watched over. Offerings were left at sacred places. Stones, groves, and springs held power felt in quiet moments of prayer. Rituals marked important times, the changing of seasons. Births, marriages, and farewells to the dead, all woven with care. These beliefs gave shape to the unknown, weaving comfort and mystery into the everyday and providing a way to understand fate and fortune. The sacred places themselves were touched with reverence, a part of the natural world made holy by time and human presence. The harshness of winter was met with preparation and resilience. Stored food was rationed fires, kept burning inside homes. Families huddled together, sharing warmth stories and the steady presence of one another. The darkness was a time for reflection, rest, and renewal before the land slowly awakened once again. The long nights shaped the Viking, spirit fostering patience, endurance, and a quiet hope that no matter the cold, the sun would return, and with it, life would flourish once more. Villages might seem isolated, but they were connected by kinship trade and shared customs, weaving a larger tapestry. This sense of belonging offered strength and identity, a quiet foundation beneath the shifting tides of Viking life. Each person played a role, their work intertwined with others, forming a delicate balance of dependence and independence. These connections carried beyond physical proximity, reaching into the shared values, beliefs, and rituals that defined community and shaped the future. The sea was never far away, always present, calling some to leave the safety of home, seeking fortune or glory. Longships were marvels of design, swift and sturdy, carrying men across unknown waters, guided by stars and instinct. These voyages were dangerous but necessary, opening paths for trade raids and settlement, shaping the Viking world. Every journey was a test of courage, skill, and endurance. Every return a celebration of survival and new stories. The sea was a vast and constant force, both feared and revered, offering opportunity and demanding respect in equal measure. Imagine walking beside these villages, feeling the texture of weathered wood, hearing the steady rhythm of daily work, the scent of salt, pine, and smoke mingling with the quiet murmur of voices and the distant call of gulls overhead. Life was hard, often uncertain, yet held moments of deep connection, resilience, and enduring hope. Each step along worn paths carries the weight of countless days lived fully in the embrace of land, sea, and sky, the world of the everyday. Viking was one of balance, struggle, and quiet strength, a world waiting patiently to be remembered. Beyond the edge of villages, forests stretched wide, ancient, and dense, home to creatures both feared and revered. Wolves hunted in packs. moving silently through shadows, and snow bears roamed thick underbrush, their heavy footprints, a reminder of wild power hidden beneath calm. Canopy, the forest provided wood for homes, fuel for fires, and game for tables, but also demanded vigilance and respect from those who entered its depths. Each journey into the trees was a careful dance of awareness, and survival farmers tended fields, with tireless care turning rocky soil into patches of life. Seeds were sown with hope under the cool northern sun. Barley's golden stalks swayed gently in the breeze. Oats and rye added grain to tables and fodder for animals. The work was backbreaking, yet essential, feeding families through long winters and sustaining the community year after year. Harvests were moments of quiet celebration, a reward for toil and patience in the embrace of earth. Animal husbandry was another vital part of Viking life. Cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats grazed on hillsides, providing milk, meat, wool, and leather. Their care required knowledge and attention, balancing grazing with protection from predators. Livestock were both wealth and sustenance, a living connection between people and land. The rhythms of animal life set craftsmanship extended into every corner of life. Woodworkers shaped planks into boat hulls, sturdy furniture, and intricate carvings. Their skill gave form and function, blending beauty with necessity. Blacksmiths tamed fire and iron, creating tools, weapons, and household goods, each hammer blow echoing through the forging hall. These crafts were not simply trades, but arts handed down through generations. Each piece telling a silent story of heritage and purpose. Women's work was not confined to household tasks. Many were skilled in medicine, using herbs and knowledge to heal wounds and ease ailments. Their care was a quiet strength, supporting families through sickness and injury. Midwives brought new life into the world, guiding mothers with calm experience. These roles carried both practical and spiritual weight, weaving care into the fabric of community health and continuity. Trade routes stretched across land and sea, linking Viking settlements with distant lands. Furs, amber, and crafted goods traveled to markets far beyond northern shores. Silver coins flowed back, bringing wealth and new influences. These exchanges brought not only goods but ideas, news, and the subtle shifting of power and culture. The world of the Viking was wide and connected. Despite the harsh landscape and distant horizons, feasting and festivals marked the calendar times of communal joy and renewal. They honored God's ancestors and the changing seasons. Gatherings were filled with food, drink, music, and dance stories that lifted spirits and bound communities tightly together. These celebrations were moments of respite from daily toil, carrying the warmth of belonging and the promise of future. Abundance everyday life for Vikings was a complex weaving of survival, tradition, belief, and community. Each day shaped by nature, cycles by the interplay of sea and land, by the bonds of family and kin. This world, though often harsh, was also rich with quiet beauty and deep connection. A world where every stone, tree, and wave held meaning and memory, waiting to be discovered once more. The cold morning stretched across the damp wooden rooftops as the smoke curled lazily into the sky from fire pits left burning overnight, and the earth was still wet from the passing mist that lingered just above the frost-kissed grass on the edge of the fjord. In the quiet before voices filled the air, there were only the soft thuds of footsteps along packed dirt, the hush of wool cloaks brushing against door frames, and the distant clatter of a goat hoof slipping on stone as someone led their herd to the edge of the pastures. Hands rough with winter's labor pulled open heavy doors as morning. Light crept into the smoky darkness within, filling the corners of longhouses with a dull glow that flickered against shields hanging on the walls and baskets filled with last season's onions and dried fish. The first meal was modest and warm, spooned from a pot blackened by years of use, hanging just above the embers that had glowed all through the night, and the scent of barley porridge. With a hint of salt and smoke settled into the walls and the clothes and the skin, a mother stirred the pot with slow circles, while a child sat on the edge of a fur blanket, rubbing sleep from their eyes, as a man bound his boots with long leather strips made from hide tanned during the last great hunt before the frost came. Outside, the wind shifted gently through the timbers, creaking softly like a voice remembering, and beneath that old sound was the stir of life, beginning again the same way it had for generations before. The smithy had already lit his coals hours earlier, his hands black with soot as he pounded out shape from heated metal, bending the glow to his will with hammer strikes that rang across the village like low bells, calling out to no one in particular. Each movement was steady and sure, not rushed, but practiced as though he could see the final shape. Before the fire had even melted the edge and his eyes never left the iron, even as sweat ran down, the furrows of his brow and his breath puffed against the cold. When the blade was ready, he quenched it in a barrel of brine, the hiss like a snake curling beneath the surface. And when he lifted it steaming into the air, he checked it with the same reverence others gave to prayer. Children ran through the frost-dusted grass. Their feet bare their laughter, a sharp contrast to the slow, patient rhythm of the village itself, their games. Imagined dragons and raiders and distant kings across the sea, they played among the stables, and near the drying racks, dodging the reach of tired arms from older sisters, who were trying to hang strips of fish meat and herbs and cloth that had soaked in dye made from bark and moss. Some carved shapes into the dirt with sticks, others crouched low, pretending to build little halls and fences of their own, and behind their laughter the steady sound of chickens pecking at the ground and dogs pacing beneath the smoke. The woodworkers sat beneath overhanging roofs, their knives gliding along the grain of soft pine, while curls of shavings fell in silence around their boots, collecting in heaps like autumn leaves. But lighter and scented of forest, they spoke very little, and even then only in half phrases or nods, because the work had no need for explanation, only precision, and rhythm and the patience to follow the grain where it led, not where one wished it would go. By afternoon, the shapes began to emerge: handles and bowls, spoons and pegs, wheel rims and door slats, and every line carved was a memory of the ones who taught them how to hold the blade just so, and lean just enough into the cut. Wool was washed down by the river, then brought back to the hall where fingers worked it into thread. With the spindle S-long draw, the wheel spinning slowly as breath and fiber moved together, women sat in groups, humming low melodies that were less song and more time itself, stretching across generations, without ever needing to be written down, only passed from hand to hand. Voice to voice, as the thread lengthened and the pile grew at their feet, the sun shifted slightly through the high slits in the wall, casting golden lines across the floor, like marks on a sundial that nobody really watched anymore, because the rhythm was already known. An elder sat by the fire, feeding it slowly with bark and sticks, whispering to a child who leaned against his knee, eyes half closed, mouth slightly parted, as the story rose and dipped and twisted. It was about a journey across a storm. It was about a man who sailed without fear, and met the sea god, and outwitted him, and returned with a treasure no one had ever seen or touched or even believed could exist. But the child didn't ask about the treasure, only about the man, S-boat, how he built it, how it floated, how he knew where to go. And the elder smiled and told the story again. But this time he made the boat bigger, and the storm wilder evening came slowly without ceremony, just as the fire grew a little brighter and the cold outside wrapped a little tighter around the bones of the houses, and the animals were drawn closer, and the doors pulled shut. Families gathered once again, this time with stew and flatbread and dried fruit, if any was left, and they shared without speaking much, because the silence had its own comfort, and everyone already knew what needed doing. The hall glowed like a lantern in the snow, and outside the stars opened, one by one across the sky, sharp and steady and familiar as the sound of someone sharpening a knife in the corner of the room. The warriors trained outside in the pale dusk, sparring with wooden weapons, their bodies moving through drills taught since childhood forms, passed down from battle to battle until they were more like dance than combat. Their breaths rose like steam, and the thud of impact echoed off the longhouse walls. But there was no anger in the strikes, only precision and sweat and discipline, a readiness that never truly slept. Once finished, they clasped arms, not words, and shared a flask of fermented honey drink, before walking back toward the warmth in silence. Their backs straight, their steps measured, their eyes already on tomorrow. And in the final quiet before sleep, when the fires dimmed and the wind outside made the beams creak, like old ships at harbor, the village seemed to sigh. A low breath shared between stone and sky, between past and present, between the known and the unknown, that waited somewhere just beyond the edge of memory. And in that stillness, every soul found a place to rest, wrapped in fur and flame and dreams of things older than time and more comforting than warmth itself. The morning mist clung thickly to the rolling hills and jagged cliffs, where the first rays of sun began to spill their pale gold light over villages, nestled tightly beneath the dark forests and open skies where the sea whispered endlessly, like a memory calling warriors to distant shores, and the scent of salt and pine filled the air with a promise of journeys yet to come, as the wind carried the songs of bards who spoke of a man born of fire and storm, whose fate was bound to the waves and the gods themselves, and whose name would echo through ages as the tides carved the edges of the world. Ragnar was said to have come from humble roots, a son of the soil and stone, whose heart beat with the fierce longing of the ocean, and the wild lands that surrounded him he grew strong among the forests. Learning the secrets of the hunt, the craft of the blade, and the wisdom of the stars, his eyes always turned to the horizon where the sea met the sky, and the unknown awaited with dangers and glory wrapped in equal measure as his body hardened in the chill of northern winds. His mind was shaped by the stories his mother, whispered by firelight of gods and heroes, and the endless struggle between chaos and order. The saga tells of Ragnar's first great voyage, when he set sail with a small band of warriors aboard. A long ship carved from the heart of an ancient tree, each plank bent and joined with the skill of generations, his eyes steady and calm as the sea rolled beneath, them carrying them away from the safety of home into the vastness, where only the stars and the cries of seabirds marked the passage of time. They sailed beyond the known coasts, braving storms that tore at sails and chilled bones. Yet it was the promise of discovery and conquest that fueled their courage, the belief that fate favored the bold, and that the gods watched over those who dared to follow their calling. Ragnar's reputation grew like wildfire across the fjords and valleys, where the news of his daring raids and victories spread. Like the rising sun illuminating even the darkest corners of the land, villages trembled at the mention of his name, and kings sent envoys with gifts, hoping to sway his favor. Yet he was a man driven not by gold, but by the thirst for adventure and the glory that came from challenging the boundaries of the world itself. His mind was sharp as the blade he wielded, and his heart wild as the seas that bore him. He was a leader who inspired loyalty through deeds, not words, and whose legend was woven into the very fabric of Viking lore, like the intricate patterns carved into the shields that marched into battle. His wives and children played their parts in the unfolding saga as partners in his journey and bearers of his bloodline, their stories, intertwined with his own, creating a tapestry of family and power that stretched across realms and generations. The sagas speak of love and loss, of joy and sorrow, as the tides of fate carried them through triumph and tragedy alike. His sons grew under the shadow of his legacy, learning to wield sword and shield, to navigate the politics of clans and kings, and to walk the fine line between honor and ambition that marked their heritage. In the great halls where fires roared and mead flowed, the stories of Ragnar's exploits were told and retold. The sagas danced between truth and myth, shaping the memory of a man who became larger than life, his battles against foreign kings, the cunning that outwitted enemies, the encounters with strange lands and peoples, all were stitched into the narrative like threads of gold and shadow, creating a mosaic of a time when the world was young and the Vikings were the storm that reshaped it. The legacy of Ragnar was not only in blood spilled or treasure gained, but in the spirit of exploration and defiance that propelled a people forward into the unknown with fierce hearts and unyielding will. As night fell, the stars shone cold and clear above the fjords, reflecting the stories. Carried by the wind, the saga of Ragnar was still unfolding, a tale of fire and ice, of earth and sea, that would inspire generations long after the fires had died down and the ships had returned to their resting places beneath the timbered roofs. The legend was alive in every whispered prayer, every carved rune, every song sung beneath the pale moonlight, and so it would be as long as the waves kissed the shores and the northern winds sang their ancient song. The dawn spread slowly, lifting the veil from the rugged coasts as the tides pulled back, revealing blackened rocks and tangled seaweed. The cries of seabirds rose higher, carrying the salt-tinged air inland to stir the hearts of those who waited and watched for the long ships to return their sails, like great wings against the horizon, and with them stories of faraway lands, rich with silver, gold, and spices unknown to the north. The echoes of battle cries and the clash of steel mingled with the roar of the ocean and the whispers of God's blessing, the daring and punishing the reckless. Ragnar's name was carried on the wind from market towns to isolated homesteads, through whispered legends told around fire pits and sung by traveling skalds, weaving his deeds into the fabric of history and myth alike until no one could tell. Where the man ended and the legend began his voyages were tales of courage and cunning, of storms braved and kingdoms challenged, of alliances forged and enemies outwitted, every word carrying the weight of a people who saw in him the embodiment of their fierce spirit and unyielding will to carve their destiny from a world of ice and shadow. The longships that bore Ragnar and his warriors were masterpieces of wood and iron, crafted by hands that had learned their trade from fathers and grandfathers, and guided by the silent wisdom of the sea itself. The hulls curved like the backs of great beasts, the oars sliced through the water in unison, and the sails caught the wind like the wings of an eagle, each journey a test of endurance, skill, and faith, a voyage. Not just across waters, but across the boundary between the known and the unknown, between the mortal and the divine, among the crew. Loyalty was hard-earned, and battles were won not only with sword and shield, but with trust and shared fate. Ragnar's leadership was a steady flame in the darkness, guiding his men through storms and skirmishes, his voice calm and commanding his presence, a shield against despair, his decisions shaped by both cunning strategy and deep understanding of the hearts of those who followed him. The bonds forged aboard those ships were stronger than iron and carried through the harshest winters and bloodiest raids. His victories brought wealth, but also enemies and challenges that tested the limits of his strength and wisdom. Each conquest added another chapter to the saga, yet with every step forward, there were losses that left scars deep within his soul. The faces of fallen comrades and broken promises haunted the long nights, beneath the cold stars, reminding him that glory was never without cost, that the path of a hero was paved with sacrifice and shadow back home. The fires burned bright as his family awaited news, the saga's tell of the love he bore for his wives and children, of the hopes he placed in them as carriers of his blood and name. Their lives entwined with his fate, their joys and sufferings part of the endless cycle of life and death that defined the Viking world, the strength of family, a fortress against the tides of fortune, theirs. A story not only of battles and voyages, but of tenderness and resilience in the face of an uncertain future. The halls of his kin rang with feasts and celebrations, where the mead flowed freely, and the skalds wove tales that blended fact and fancy, creating a living tapestry that preserved memory and inspired courage. Here the community came together to honor ancestors and gods, to renew bonds and share hopes and voices that rose and fell like the ocean itself, each gathering a thread in the vast web of Viking life, connecting past to present and weaving future stories yet to be told. As the seasons turned, the rhythms of life pulsed steadily beneath the surface of legend, the coming of spring with its promise of renewal. The long days of summer filled with labor and laughter, the crisp coolness of autumn and the harsh stillness of winter, each phase shaping the people and the land, their cycles mirrored in the saga of Ragnar, whose story moved with the tides and the winds, with the changing light and shadow, marking the passage of time and the endurance of spirit. The gods watched over these unfolding tales, their presence felt in the whisper of leaves, the crackle of fire, and the crash of waves. Their favor sought through rites and offerings in sacred groves and on rocky promontories, where earth met sea and sky, the sacred and the mundane intertwined. The divine breath woven into the everyday acts of courage and care, the blessings and curses that shaped the course of lives and the destiny of a people bound to the land and the sea. Thus the saga of Ragnar unfolds, not merely as a chronicle of one man, but as a mirror reflecting the hopes, fears, and dreams of an age of time, when the world was vast and wild and every step into the unknown was an act of defiance and faith, a story that lives in the breath of the wind, the roar of the ocean, and the beating hearts of those who dare to remember and to dream beyond the edge of the world. Ragnar rode through frost-kissed valleys where wolf tracks crossed the snow, and ravens circled above, waiting for the dead to be claimed by the wind and the earth as the winter. Sun clung low over hills that held the echoes of old gods and the silence of bones. Beneath the soil, his men followed behind, wrapped in cloaks woven from the wool of their lands, hands gripping leather reins with cracked knuckles, and breath turning white as they passed frozen rivers and trees, heavy with the weight of time and stories whispered beneath bark. They camped beneath cliffs where the wind cried like widows, and the fires gave little warmth to those who dreamed of home. While sharpening swords with slow care, their eyes watching the dark, beyond the flames, and remembering the voices of kin who never returned. In the cold hush before dawn, Ragnar would sit apart, his axe beside him, and his thoughts drifting like smoke toward sons not yet born and sagas, not yet sung, the weight of lineage pressing heavy on his back, as if the gods themselves carved their names into his spine. He spoke with the old man they called the Tongue, who knew every rune carved into stone, and every tale of ice and fire from the time before time, who said fate was not given, but grown like trees bending beneath storms, yet always reaching for sky. Ragnar listened in silence, tracing paths on his palm, as if the creases could show the way to glory or doom, his shadow long against the embers, his silence. A kind of worship to the winds that once carried his ancestors across seas, unknown, and spirits unseen. At the next village, he offered peace with one hand and the edge of steel with the other, for the chieftain there had broken old oaths and taken what was not his, and though Ragnar would rather speak than bleed, he knew the gods kept no peace for cowards. The clash was brief but brutal, the kind of violence that lives in the bones long after wounds have healed where shields shattered. And axes found ribs, and the air thickened with shouts, prayers, and the taste of iron drawn from the bodies of the fallen. Ragnar stood over the broken chieftain, not to boast, but to remember that every man, no matter how loud his threats or tall his hall, would one day kneel before the judgment of time or the swing of another man's blade. And that pride was not armor, but weight. The people of the village brought him offerings not out of fear, but out of reverence, for he left. Their homes standing and their kin unharmed, only the greedy and oath-breakers fell beneath his blade, and to them this was not cruelty but the restoration of balance. He spoke not of gold or tribute, but of paths shared and storms endured together, of the need to remember who fed whom in winter, who stood in walls, shoulder to shoulder, and who would sing your name when you were ash and bone. The skalds began to follow him again, their fingers calloused from lyres, and cold their eyes. Sharp as crows as they watched and listened, writing his steps into the thread of history, weaving his days into the long cloak of legend. Stretched back to Odin's breath, the sons of Ragnar were not yet born, but the world already whispered their names, as if fate itself waited for them in womb. And cradle and future wars, their deeds foretold in the twitch of a raven S-wing and the pattern of blood. Spilled across northern soil, Ragnar knew the burden of fatherhood before the child ever wailed in the dark. Before small hands reached for his beard, before the question of what kind of man he would shape with his own stories and scars, and the quiet love behind a furrowed brow. He spoke often with Aslog, not just of love, but of lineages and lore of dreams, seen by seers, and warnings from waters where ancient eyes watched from beneath, ice and stone speaking riddles that clung to sleep and woke them both with quiet dread. On ships he looked not to the horizon, but to memory, for he had sailed more seas than most, and seen more shores than many. Yet still, each wave seemed to whisper questions not yet answered, and names not yet mourned, lost to foam and time. There were nights when the crew would dream of whales bigger than their boats, of lights in the sky that danced like spirits, and of voices. Beneath the waves that sang in languages older than speech and older than the stars, Ragnar did not fear such things, for he had spoken with seers who told him that what waits beyond is neither fire nor darkness, but a silence filled with every story ever told a hall, where even the defeated are welcomed if they died with honor in their hearts. He hunted not for glory, but for meaning, testing himself against mountain storms and the howls of beasts, who knew no king to prove that he was still flesh, and not yet. Myths still bound by hunger and cold, and the ache that lives in every warrior's joints. He carried a stone from his boyhood, buried in his pouch wrapped in wool, a reminder of home, of the mother who taught him that strength was not always loud, and that mercy was a kind of courage that lasted longer than steel. Even now, with his name rising like smoke among the people, he paused by streams to watch fish move through the current, to listen to birds, speak to branches, and to feel his breath join the wind that had carried his kin long before ships were carved or kings crowned. The priests of the old ways came to him, asking nothing, giving little but words. They spoke of signs in entrails, and movements in stars of gods, stirring in roots and dreams of wolves in flame. They feared Ragnar, and yet needed him. He allowed them near, not for power, but for understanding, for even a warrior must ask questions when the skies bleed or the fields rot, or children are born with eyes that see too much, and voices that echo beyond flesh. He believed in the gods, but not always in their messengers, for he had seen men twist prophecy to serve greed and carve runes, not to remember, but to manipulate the fearful and turn wisdom into weapon. Ragnar chose his battles not by coin, but by consequence, asking who would suffer, who would rise, and what would be remembered, for he knew that history was written, not only in blood, but in bread, and that some victories left no widows or orphans. His ships now moved not in raiding lines, but in trade fleets, sails marked not with wolves, but with symbols of unity, shared harvests. Marriages between tribes, old rivalries, folded into new kinship under the eye of a man who had known both war and forgiveness. He wore his years with quiet dignity scars mapped across his skin like the rings of a tree, showing not weakness but time and each one. A chapter in a story that others now told beneath roofs, warmed by his choices. Still there were whispers of unrest, distant kings who feared his name or envied his reach, who sent spies in cloaks and coins in bags, hoping to stir the embers of forgotten grudges, to test whether Ragnar still burned with the fire that forged him. He welcomed these challenges, not with anger, but curiosity, for he knew that even fire needs fuel, and that sometimes the old must be tested to remind the young why they sleep safe and why the winds still carry the sound of axes and truth. As the days grew shorter and the geese flew south, he felt something in his bones, not weakness but a shift, as if the ground beneath him had begun to move, and the past was rising to meet him in dreams and footsteps and the silence between words. He had stood in halls ringed with firelight, while kings offered gold and men offered swords, but nothing tasted as rich. To him is the thrill of the unknown, the quiet before a raid, the hush of oars. Rising in unison, in that moment when sea and sky met, and the horizon broke, and the gods watched. His memories were built of those silences between roars the night spent, beneath open stars with frost biting at his beard, and the murmurs of tales told around drifting. Smoke, the eyes of suns, bright with promise, and the old warrior speaking his name in whispers layered with awe and fear. Even as his hair grayed, and the bones ached, and fewer ships bore his banner, he was no lesser legend. Because in each youth who tied his belt and lifted his axe, Ragnar was reborn again, as he always would be, in sagas and in dreams. Stories twisted and grew like the branches of Yggdrasil, each one rooted in truth, but flowering in madness. He became a wolf king to some, a cursed man to others, a father whose bloodline carved kingdoms across oceans, whose sons like Ivar and Bjorn would carry the echoes of his wrath and grief. There were tales of serpents and dungeons of betrayal sown beneath courtly laughter of him falling to cunning not sword of an English king, who feared the man so much he bound him not with chains, but with riddles and dark pits, where the earth itself swallowed Ragnar whole, and the air stank of rot. And in that pit, they say, he laughed, not cried, for he had lived more lives than most, and met his end with wide eyes, because if death was the final voyage, then he would sail it with pride, while his killers listened above to his voice, still rising clear from the dark. They say the snakes crawled across him, yet none broke his voice, and in his final breath he told the earth to remember his name. He told the worms to whisper it to the roots of trees and the rocks, to hum it in the soil. He told the wind to carry it far beyond Wessex. And so it did, carried through time, through songs sung in firelight and lips, trembling on battlefields his saga, refused to sink it, floated it, roared it, held fast, and Ragnar the man became Ragnar the myth, unkillable in memory and untouchable by time. From Viking hearth to modern book, from child S. Bedtime to scholar S. scroll, he lived on not because he was perfect or even victorious, but because he was fire-shaped into flesh, and wherever men dreamed of freedom, they dreamed of Ragnar Lothbrok, and beyond the cold northern winds, where tales once frozen in fjords began to thaw into poetry. Ragnar walked again, not in flesh, but in echo his name, the drumbeat of Viking blood that never stilled his hunger for voyage. His cry across the centuries that men remembered even in lands he never saw. Across libraries and graveyards, across lecture halls, and whispered legends among shepherds and blacksmiths. His shadow bent over maps that once feared his ships, and in the voices of modern men, seeking glory not in conquest, but in meaning. He stirred again a restless ghost, asking what it meant to truly live. He did not need temples or tombs, for the world became his reliquary, his bones scattered in myth, and his soul cradled in the dust of pages and the curve of swords that once bore his crest, now only carved in dreams and old wood, and yet still dangerous in the right hands. There are those who say Ragnar was a fable, a crafted lie told by men in need of a god, who bled and laughed and made mistakes. But others say no man could inspire such terror, such longing, such grief, without living at least once, and that behind the mask of saga was breath and beard and broken voice. He was not just one man, but a mirror of the age itself, the hardness of survival, the softness of longing for legacy, the cruel warmth of battle brotherhood, and the sharp ache of knowing sons must rise where fathers fall and build taller, not despite, but because of the ruins left behind. He did not seek immortality through mercy or martyrdom, but through motion, each raid, each kiss, each loss, each fire etched into time, not as conquest but as warning that men must sail beyond their shores or rot, where they stand at God's whisper only to those who dare to listen. He died many times in many ways, but none were ever enough to end him truly, for the world had too many corners in need of his flame. Too many stories begging for thunder, too many warriors glancing at the sea and wondering if he still watched from the mist. So long as a youth lifts an axe and whispers his name, so long as a fire burns and a tale is told, so long as men wonder how one life can ripple across empires. Ragnar lives not in stone, not in shrine, but in story, and that is the only place where death cannot reach. And in that way the saga is never done, never final, always open like the ocean itself, wide and waiting and wild. Ragnar walks again not to conquer, but to remind that the greatest legends are not perfect or polished, but pulsing with flaw and fury and fire. So sit now by your own hearth and listen. Let the wind outside be his, or strokes the creak in the timber. His breath the flicker and flame, his voice for you are the end of his tale, and also its beginning. For in every breath that longs for freedom, and every heart that breaks, against silence, he is still there. In the dark before dawn, in the whisper before war, in the pause before choice, Ragnar waits not to command, not to conquer, but to challenge, to dare you to rise not as him, but as yourself, shaped by your storms, burned by your trials, yet unbroken, for that is the final truth of the saga, not the death or the dragons or the crowns, won or lost, but the simple wild truth that to be alive is to fight not others, but time itself, and to carve in its flesh the shape of your soul, as Ragnar did once, and as you must now, for the story is yours to carry forward. The snow did not speak in words, but in silence it pressed against wooden beams and iron nails with a weight that no man could fight against, and in that silence lay, beneath the crushing layers of centuries where frost bloomed like lichen, across old leather and bone, lay secrets. The ice never meant to give back, not to kings, not to skalds, not even to the gods, because time does not willingly return. What it swallows, especially when what it took was never truly understood. The north winds had long grown quiet, but the things they once carried still lingered like dreams, clinging to the walls of a ship, long buried in permafrost like whispers, woven into a fragment of wool. The color faded, the purpose unknown, but the presence undeniable and haunting to those who dared dig too deep. Not every Viking tale was forged in war. Some were stitched in secrecy in places where the sun did not rise for days or weeks, and the aurora danced above like the eyes of forgotten deities, blinking once, then gone and in. That flickering world, men and women lived not with iron and rage, but with rituals of quiet power. They built not ships, but circles of standing stones carved with symbols older than runes, older than Odin, older than even the first name ever chiseled into a blade, and in those circles they called upon things that did not belong to Midgard, and did not answer with kindness, but with cold and consequence. The bones found beneath the glaciers told of these things, bones that had been broken not in battle, but in ceremony. Ribs shattered inwards, skulls, pierced not by axes, but by thin obsidian spikes, that had no place in northern earthen mouths, filled with moss, not coins, as if the dead had to be silenced, not paid. Ice preserves and ice hides. It tells stories with its teeth. It grips memories in frozen veins, so deep the sun cannot reach them. But sometimes the ice melts not because it wants to, but because it cannot hold forever, and when it does, the things it releases are not always meant to be found by men. A single shoe, stitched from walrus hide, the sole still worn from long marches, a child as toy, carved from driftwood, with a smiling serpent twined around it. A fragment of red cloth found in the stomach of a man buried face down in a glacier ice. Wide mouth full of black snow, like he had screamed for centuries. These were not items of trade or trophies of war. These were pieces of lives interrupted abruptly, not by conquest, but by something colder and older than sword or flame, something that did not kill with glory, but with silence and the unrelenting patience of ice. One tale recovered from a half-rotted birch scroll buried inside a wooden chest sealed with tar spoke of a village. Where no one grew old, where the same people greeted travelers century after century, never changing, never aging. Eyes bright and skin pale like polished horn, they offered warmth and smiles, but never stepped beyond their boundary. The scroll ended mid-word. The ink faded, the wood cracked from within, as if the story itself resisted being told. And when the ruins of that village were found, no bones remained, no tools, no evidence of fire or food, only the stone circle at the center, still unmarred, still humming, when touched still colder than the snow around it. Some say these were the ice witches. Others claim they were the last of an ancient race, older than giants, older than Niflheim itself, living beneath the world, feeding on dreams and memories frozen in time. But no one who stayed near those stones long remained unchanged, and many never returned at all. Further west, in the shadow of a cliff shaped like a serpent, Espine explorers uncovered a burial site, arranged not in rows or circles, but in spirals, as if the dead had been laid to rest in motion. Moving toward a center none could find, and the bones bore marks like runes, but curved and flowing like waves. One skull was larger than a man-ass and had no human features, and when the scholars brought it to light, the ice began to crackle beneath their feet, and they left. Quickly, afraid not of collapse, but of something rising, something that had been asleep as long as the glacier itself, and was now aware it had been seen. The skull was lost in a fire. Weeks later, the warehouse where it was kept struck by lightning on a clear sky, and the ashes found. Afterward formed patterns on the floor, like a map or a message that no one could read, and no one tried again for fear that what they had touched was not dead, but waiting. In another place, too high for trees, too cold for birds, lay a valley where sound did not echo, where screams vanished as if devoured, and where frost formed not on the ground, but in the air, suspended like dust in moonlight. And there they found the remains of a Viking camp, arranged meticulously as if abandoned mid-thought bowls still held dried meat tents. Still stood with fur-lined cloaks folded inside, weapons untouched shields, leaning against stones as if men would return after a short walk. But they never had, and the snow had not buried them because no snow fell there not for hundreds of years, until the camp was disturbed. Once the tents were opened, once the ground was walked on again, the snow returned heavy and fast, and the valley sealed itself again, as if the memory had been reopened, and the world rejected it, and the scholars who visited spoke of dreams where ice crawled up their spines and voices, whispered in languages they had never heard, but somehow understood. Each object pulled from the frost had its own story, but no answers a comb carved with runes. No one recognized a drinking horn fused to the hand of its bearer, as if they had refused to let it go. Even in death, a silver coin, marked not with Thor's hammer or a king's profile, but with a spiral swallowing itself. They were not the treasures of raiders, nor the offerings of chieftains. They were remnants of a world parallel to the Viking one, a world that shared space, but not rules where death walked slowly and memory was a weapon, and where ice did not preserve history but trapped it to prevent its return. It is said that some Vikings did not fear death because they knew it was not an end but a return. But there were those among them who did not return to Valhalla or Hell, those who vanished into the white without name or tale, because what claimed them was not of this world, and their sagas were not meant for mortal ears. He wandered beneath the sky that never slept, where light danced strange across the snow, and no shadow ever stayed still, and in that frozen domain he felt smaller than he ever had, not from fear, but from awe, because here the old gods whispered through the frost, and the ice carried the voices of those long buried. Each creak beneath his boots told stories that had waited 1,000 winters, pressing against the silence with secrets. Unscreamed whole villages trapped in time, their bones etched with wounds no enemy ever made, their hearths still full of soot, their tools still set as if someone had just stood to leave. There were shields found in lakes and weapons buried under glacial stone, etched not with war marks, but with runes. No skald ever dared to sing aloud, signs that twisted when read from different angles, like they wanted to stay hidden, or like they were meant for eyes that no longer walked the world. The deeper the ice stretched, the older the questions became ships, locked inside mountain caves too high for tides, yet lined with salt crust, as if oceans once reached them, or perhaps as if they had sailed through storms, not of this realm, and docked in places where only gods and madmen could follow. In these places, the wind spoke like an echo made of teeth, gnashing through time, carrying scents that had no source, ash and myrrh, and something older, something like blood, that had dried before men had ever named the stars, and every gust felt like a challenge, a dare to keep digging, to keep listening. The bones were not always human. Some were twisted beyond recognition, skulls with horns that curled backward, not forward limbs too. Many for men, but too structured for beasts. And the stories whispered, by the Sami elders warned of doorways sealed not to protect men from beasts, but to protect beasts from men. There were rings found buried in circles of stone that grew warm to the touch when the auroras flared, and scholars argued over their origins until one vanished, holding it near a fjord where nothing grew and where the locals refused to look after dark, and even the ravens refused to land. They told of carvings on cliff faces that could only be seen from the sea, and only when the ice receded, and even then, only at twilight, and only if one had not eaten for a full day. And these carvings did not depict gods or warriors, but maps of constellations that no longer exist in our skies. Some said they charted the rise and fall of stars long dead. Others believed they mapped migrations of something ancient and cold, something that once slept beneath the sea and walked when the world was new before Odin ever lifted his spear. Or Ymir's skull became the sky. The runestones left in the ice fields bore messages not of triumph, but warnings repeated in different dialects from faraway tribes, who had never met and yet carved the same images in the same places over the same bones, and it made the ice feel not like a prison, but a vault. These warnings often depicted the sun being swallowed and the sea turning to smoke and ships that sailed into flame. Rather than water, their sails made of skin, not cloth, their rowers eyeless, yet screaming, and behind them shapes too large to name swam through the clouds. They left behind tiny charms shaped like wolves and birds and dragons, but their eyes were always missing, hollow, as if gouged out on purpose or never meant to be there, and when held too long, these trinkets made men's hands go numb, and sometimes they dreamed of trees with bleeding bark. Some of the sagas long dismissed as fantasy were now being reconsidered, not as metaphor, but as coded. Memory warnings written in rhyme to outlast time, so that even if the mouth forgot the tongue, would remember the melody and carry the shape of danger. The saga spoke of the drowned queen, a woman with hair of ice and fingers like fish bones, who ruled under the glaciers and demanded songs, not prayers, from those who wandered too far north, and that, if her name was sung wrongly even once, the ice would crack and her hand would rise. Some stories told of her warriors draped in bone, armor with sealskin cloaks, who walked the borders of frost and shadow, and could only be killed by warmth, not weapon their bodies unmarked by blades, but undone by firelight, and the sound of laughter which they hated above all things. There were black stones buried in patterns in the tundra that, when melted, revealed symbols like veins, pulsing across the surface, and the only man who mapped them all began to speak in verses and draw shapes in his blood, and eventually vanished into the forest, leaving behind only the map. Archaeologists found an entire feast hall preserved under a glacier, with tankards still half full and meat still pink, yet no sign of struggle, no bones, no footprints, just silence, as though the revelers had simply vanished in mid-toast, and some said the gods came for them, others said something else. The walls of that hall were carved with images of eyes open wide, always open and looking, and in the center a great table shaped like a wheel around a fire pit with no ash, as if the fire never burned or still burned in another time, in another world. Some places had stone steps that led downward into nothing, into tunnels that swallowed heat and light. And when dared, the bravest souls descended and returned either broken or blessed, but always changed, and what they said made no sense until it did, and then it never left the mind. One man returned speaking a language no one recognized, but every dog howled when he opened his mouth, and cats refused to enter the house, and his wife swore he smelled like snow and rust forever after, and even when he died, he did not rot, he simply faded like mist. They buried him in a sealed mound, but every winter the ground cracked over it, and from the hole came the sound of humming low and slow like a lullaby, sung backward, and the locals began to leave offerings at the mound, not from reverence but from fear of forgetting to do so. Other frozen finds included boats filled with iron cages no larger than a man's torso lined with fur on the inside, and some still had remnants of hair and nails within, suggesting not prisoners but something bred or stored or worshipped, and no record told. Why? Beside one of these boats lay a skeleton curled fetal and marked with carved spiral tattoos that glowed faintly under moonlight, and beside him a bag of teeth, each from a different animal, none native to the region, and scholars who touched them reported dreams of drowning in black seas. They dug deeper and found doorways underground, made of whalebone tied together with ropes of human hair. And these opened to nothing but darkness, yet every sound made. Inside came back louder, as if the ice itself were listening and trying to remember who walked here last. Even the sagas failed to describe what some of these sites held, because they were too old even for the skalds, or perhaps too dangerous to speak of. And so the silences were what told the truth better than words ever could. One saga ended not with death, but with a door opening, and the last line simply read, "He did not return, but neither did the sun, and this was carved on a wall deep beneath the glacier, beneath a place where compasses spun and snow fell upward into the sky. And near that wall they found a pool of perfectly still water, black as night, unmoving even in wind, and when they dropped a torch into it, the light did not sink, it simply vanished, and one man claimed he saw his own face in the pool long before he looked in." These were the mysteries not just of the Vikings, but of what they feared, what they could not conquer, what they tried to forget, but could not, and what they left behind, not as treasure, but as warning. They did not write everything because some things were meant to be buried, to be frozen beneath the ice where no tongue could speak them aloud and know I could see them twice, and those who tried to remember often found that memory was the worst punishment of all. And yet we dig, and yet we search, and yet we listen. Because the cold does not kill curiosity, it only slows the heartbeat just enough to make you think you are alone, when the ice has always been watching, somewhere high above the Arctic tree line, where the sun barely arcs during winter and shadows stretch endlessly across the ridged spines of snowbound mountains and jagged cliffs glazed with ice like pale veins of the earth. The frozen wind does not howl, it speaks in brittle tongues rattling over stone and glacial ravines brushing against the remnants of a world once warm, once lived, once sung, but now sealed in silence, buried under layers of time and snow and memory. Here, where no plow has touched the ground and no footprints linger for more than a breath, the secrets of the Viking world lie dormant, cradled in frost and guarded by the sky. The ice does not forget it, does not forgive it, only preserves in patience, awaiting the warmth of curiosity, the flame of discovery to melt its ancient bonds, and so the past stirs not in fire, not in thunder, but in a whisper in the quietest hour of a melting world. And it begins slowly as the 21st century stretches thin as glaciers. Retreat and permafrost loosens its grip, the earth exhales and hidden things rise, a shoe made of birch bark, its sole worn smooth by journeys. Unknown slips free from the soil, a woolen mitten still tight in its weave. Still whole after centuries, emerges from the crust as if just dropped, and beside it, bones. Some curled like a resting reindeer, some scattered like forgotten oxen, and some too human, too still Vikings who never returned to their halls, whose breath last touched frost, not fire, whose stories never reached the pages of saga. In Norway, Lenbreen Pass, archaeologists kneel not with shovels, but with reverence. They use brushes, fingertips, whispers. They uncover the broken sleigh runners of travelers. Frozen mid-passage, a horse's skull still carrying the bridle of its last ride. A finely spun wool cloak crumpled and iced, suggesting nobility, perhaps a messenger. Perhaps a lord, perhaps a fugitive. The silence does not answer it, only reveals. Over 800 artifacts rise from the frozen silence, skis worn thin from use, bound in sinew and iron laid side by side like twins asleep. Woven baskets holding blades, chisels, needles, scraps of everyday life not meant for legacy but arrested in the final moment of function, trapped by winter. Untouched by rot, they are not buried treasures. They are the heartbeat of lives paused in the snow, waiting to resume. When the sun touches the trail, when the snow clears, when the wind shifts just right, it feels as though someone only just left. Their presence lingers not in footprints, but in the shape of a tool, in the fray of a garment, in the way the wood bends from habit. But Norway is only the beginning. Greenland speaks to in the muted tones of frost and time along its southern coast, where the Norse once built lives from stone and dream. Archaeologists uncover entire farms, homes, barns, churches, foundations, mapped in ice and memory layered with seal bones, and fish scales the remains of a people who turned to the sea as their crops failed, whose hands once milked cows now vanished, whose prayers echoed in churches now swallowed by frost. These Greenland Vikings came with cattle, with sheep, with hopes of a new beginning in a green land. But the climate changed, the summers faded, the winters grew teeth, and the storms came hard across the Atlantic. The trade ships stopped arriving, the food grew scarce. The soil turned to rock, and still they endured until they disappeared, not in fire, not in conquest, but in a quiet surrender into the cold. The ice holds even their disappearance. It holds the shape of their tools, the ash from their last fires, the pollen from their last harvests, the footprints of their last walk to a crumbling chapel it holds. Silence, and in that silence a kind of knowing. And far beyond Greenland, beyond the known, there are whispers from Newfoundland. Point Rosie, where satellite eyes in 2016 caught strange shapes beneath the moss, hints of ironworking. Slag turf walls, burned stones, the clues of a Norse presence far from home. The excavation teams came with hope, with careful hands. They found more questions than answers, but the possibility remains, perhaps more. Norse sites await discovery. Perhaps the sagas underestimated how far they truly sailed, how much they touched, how deeply they tried to stay. Modern eyes scan with new tools. Drones skim icy passes, sonar reaches beneath sea and glacier satellite images. Flicker with hints and outlines. We are always watching now, waiting perhaps for the burial mound of a forgotten chieftain to rise, perhaps for the hull of a ship long buried beneath the seabed to come. Loose, perhaps, just for a single wooden comb. Each object reshapes what we believe. Each item makes the Viking story more real, less myth, more human. A child's toy carved from driftwood, a brooch made from glass beads traded from distant lands, a half-knitted sock frozen mid-loop, a bronze needle still waiting to be pulled through thread. These are the truths of the Viking world, quiet domestic lived, not just told they were warriors, yes, but also weavers, herders, storytellers, parents. They stirred stew, they stitched cloaks. They sang, they cried, they worried through storms, they kissed foreheads and stoked fire and lived. One archaeologist stood in meltwater knee-deep, held up a perfect arrow, and said, "It feels like it was dropped yesterday." But it was dropped 1,000 years ago, and still it spoke as clearly as if its owner stood nearby, watching from behind a curtain of snow. Even now, some believe long ships lie frozen in fjords. Intact hulls sealed in ice masts, collapsed under snowfall treasure, still locked and watertight. Chests, salt, still clinging to timbers from oceans, not sailed in centuries. If the ice lets go, they may rise not as ghosts, but as truths, as vessels of memory. But it is not only artifacts we seek. It is the silence itself that speaks loudest, the daily moments, the quiet gestures, the untold acts that built the Viking Age. These are not recorded in saga. These are not sung in hall. They are carried in the bend of a spoon, in the weave of a sleeve, in the shape of a comb. The ice remembers all of it, and in remembering teaches us not about glory, but about endurance, not about conquest, but about living and losing and leaving pieces behind. With every thaw, every comb, every fragment we draw closer, they step out of story into skin, into breath. They are no longer just names in songs, but people whose lives echo faintly in the cold, whose last steps still press gently into paths we now follow. They are the Vikings beneath the ice. The snow had fallen for days, silent as prayer, blanketing the valley in a hush that seemed to erase even time. Somewhere beneath that thick white stillness, buried in permafrost and history alike, lay the untouched remains of a forgotten Norse chieftain. No name remained, no saga preserved him. Only the ice remembered, only the frost held his secret. And somewhere within that silence, a wind whispered secrets the sagas forgot. In a distant part of Scandinavia, high in the tundra, where a few now walk, and even fewer linger, archaeologists uncovered a burial mound preserved so perfectly that the textiles still clung to the bones, threads of linen, and wool stitched with a care that defied the centuries. His cloak dyed in faded hues of madder, red and deep woad. Blue still held the impression of an embroidered serpent, a Midgard guardian to watch over him in the realm. Beyond, beneath that serpent, was a mark unseen until the ice melted, a symbol unknown, a whisper from a lost tradition. Beside him, a sword lay not in its scabbard, but across his chest, a deliberate placement, its hilt worn smooth by hands-long dust. The blade was bent, not from battle, but by ritual. Vikings often killed their weapons. Before burial, snapping swords and warping spears so they could follow their owner into death, rendered useless to any who might steal them. But this sword bore more than where it bore carvings, messages etched into steel, to shallow to sea. until the right light passed, maybe a name, maybe a prayer. The frozen ground had preserved even more at the foot of the grave. Tucked into what once was a leather pouch, researchers found fragments of runic bone. A divination set each rune inscribed carefully, likely hand-carved by the man himself, perhaps passed down from father to son. They were tools of fate, meant not for mere fortune-telling, but for communion with something deeper ancestors. Gods, perhaps fate itself, and in their silence they seemed to whisper still. Yet it was what lay beneath the bones that truly disturbed the excavators. A second skeleton curled beside the chieftain, smaller, unarmed, bound at the wrists. It told of a sacrifice, a burial not shared, but imposed. Likely a thrall, a servant, offered to accompany the nobleman into death, a common, if brutal, practice in the earliest Viking centuries. As horrifying as it was, the find illuminated an old truth about Norse life and death, that loyalty in some corners of the Viking world was demanded beyond breath. Ice does not lie, it does not embellish, as sagas do, it tells what was not, what should have been. Further north, across the sea in Greenland, a similar mystery unfolded at a long-abandoned Viking farmstead. Locked in the grip of a retreating glacier, archaeologists discovered dozens of graves dating from the last days of Norse Greenlanders, those final generations before the settlement collapsed into silence. The bones told stories their owners never had a chance to finish. Children teeth worn prematurely, women hips fractured from too many births, men's shoulders twisted and gnarled from years of rowing, hauling, cutting ice. Their bodies bore the signs of desperation, malnutrition, stunted growth, exposure. What had once been a thriving outpost of Viking life had over centuries become an icy tomb. Why had they vanished? Why had no ships returned? The sagas did not speak of them. No letters, no calls for help. The answer, perhaps, was in the bones and the silence between them. Some scholars now believe that climate change, a medieval mini-ice age, had pushed the Norse Greenlanders beyond their limits. Crops failed, livestock perished, trade routes froze over isolated, proud and clinging to customs from a homeland that no longer answered. They slowly starved, not in one grand disaster, but drip by drip, winter by winter. One of the graves held a woman in her 60s old. By the standards of her time, she was buried in a dress made decades earlier, patched and worn thin. Her teeth were mostly gone, worn down from grinding grain in stone mills. But in her hands, folded over her chest, lay a rosary carved from walrus, ivory Christian, in shape pagan, in texture, a blend of old and new faith and fear. She may have died in hope, or in confusion, the ice would not say. And neither did the wind, which passed over her grave like a breath held for centuries. In Iceland, tales echoed of other frozen secrets, bodies lost in lava, tubes buried in sudden volcanic eruptions, or sealed within collapsing turf homes. A man discovered in the 20th century, still wearing iron nails sewn into his cloak, a charm against the dead walking. His face was frozen in a grimace, not of pain, but fear. Did he die running, or watching, or was he buried alive in a ritual gone awry? The layers of ash told little, only that fire had come fast. Ice preserved more than flesh in deep. Norwegian lakes divers found longboats sunken with deliberate care, not wrecked by storm, but placed offerings, perhaps ritual sacrifices to the gods of the deep. The gods of war and wind and wave shields still lined the rails, their painted surfaces faded, but intact. One bore the rune for Tiwaz, the god of justice, law and sacrifice. The boat had no bodies, only tools, grain bones of animals, a feast sent downward to gods unseen even further east. In the wetlands of Denmark, peat bogs kept a different kind of memory. Not Viking, but older Iron Age men and women, cast into the earth, their flesh turned leather by time and tannins. But the Vikings would have known these lands, perhaps even passed them on trading routes. Did they see the dark hollows where ancestors lay? Did they whisper names into the soil as they passed? Or did they simply feel a chill, not from wind, but memory? The mysteries extended even into the seas along the coastlines of the Baltic. Underwater archaeologists found strange structures, rock formations, shaped into barriers, half walls. Rings, some believe they were fish traps. Others think they were ritual circles now submerged by the slow rise of centuries. Coins from Arabic lands were found tucked between stones, silver dirhams, worn by waves traded across continents. How did they get there? Who brought them? Were they gifts, spoils, or something else entirely? Mystery clung not only to the dead, but to the living who made them. One particularly haunting discovery came in Sweden on the island of Åland. in a fortified Viking village called Sandby Borg. Archaeologists uncovered a scene unlike any other massacre, frozen in place. No one had buried the dead. No one had scavenged the bodies. Skeletons still lay where they had fallen, some with weapons in hand, others clearly ambushed children, women, elders, all slain. Why had no one returned to bury them? Why had the site been abandoned completely? Some believe the massacre was so brutal, so taboo, that the site became cursed. Others think it was a plague, that fear of disease kept even kin away. Whatever the cause, the site stands as a ghost town. A frozen moment in history, a Viking Pompeii, and still the ice gives more. Just a few years ago, a Norwegian glacier receded enough to reveal something unexpected. A Viking arrow fletched and tipped, still sharp. Then a second, then dozens of forgotten hunting ground had emerged from the melting ice. The arrows were not from war, but from survival. Reindeer once roamed there in winter, and Viking hunters had stalked them for food. One arrow had been fired and missed its shaft wedged between stones. It had lain there since the 800s untouched. Nearby they found shoes, a child made of hide sewn with sinew. Left behind, maybe in haste or tragedy, footprints still marked the softening mud beneath. The past walked again, and every step it took echoed louder than the wind. As the glaciers melt, they release not only artifacts, but memories. The Viking world was never truly buried, only waiting. And in this soft unearthing and the slow thaw of centuries, we begin to see them, not as warriors or savages, but as people. As fathers, daughters, lovers, enemies, as humans who feared death, loved stories, hunted deer, buried secrets, and made peace with gods they were not sure existed. And what else lies beneath the ice still? What final mystery waits just beneath a ridge, tucked in a fold of frozen earth? No one knows, but the frost remembers. Vikings roamed the cold, bit deep into the bones of all living creatures, and the wind whispered secrets older than memory itself as it swept through the skeletal trees and cracked across the brittle ice. The world seemed to hold its breath in, waiting for something lost to be found beneath the endless white. And the shadow of towering glaciers loomed like stone sentinels, guardians of forgotten gods, watching over silent lands. The ice had kept its vigil for centuries, guarding stories buried beneath layers of frost and time tales, not written in scrolls or sung in mead halls, but carved in silence and shadow. Where earth and cold met in an eternal embrace, where those who dared to delve into its frozen depths uncovered fragments of lives. Caught between worlds of fire and ice, the mundane and the mythic intertwined frozen tableau of existence halted in mid-breath and mid-heartbeat among the glaciers and ice fields. Men and women once moved with purpose, their hands skilled at crafting tools, weapons, and art. Their feet treading paths now lost beneath shifting snow and creeping ice. The remnants of their campsites lay scattered and hidden. Valleys covered by snowdrifts and ice sheets that grew ever thicker each year, hiding from the eyes of time. The implements of daily life and the remnants of ceremonies whose meaning had slipped away like smoke into the frigid air. A single iron axe head, rusted but intact, lay half buried beneath a sheet of translucent ice, its edges worn smooth by use, and the relentless grind of the glacier above it. It spoke silently of the hands that had wielded it in struggle and toil, runners pointing to the sky as if pleading for release. From the icy tomb that held it captive, the leather straps once fastened to the sled were brittle and cracked, their weave revealing the skill of the craftsman who had braided sinew into strength. The sled had carried goods across frozen tundra, or perhaps pulled a fallen warrior from the battlefield. Now it served as a silent monument to journeys ended abruptly, and stories untold. Buried beneath the ice, a fragmented bone flute carved from reindeer antler bore the faint marks of human hands and artistry. Its hollow notes once called the community to gatherings or soothed restless children as night fell. The instrument was cracked and incomplete, yet its presence whispered of music carried on northern winds, the songs of a people whose voices had been silenced, but whose echoes remained in the shadows of ice caves. Explorers discovered textiles faded to ghostly hues, but still soft to the touch. Fine threads of wool and linen woven with care, and dyed with pigments derived from earth and plants. The patterns told stories of identity and belonging, each stitch a word in a language, lost to time, but still spoken through cloth. The garments wrapped bodies against biting cold, shielding flesh from frostbite and harsh winds, while symbolizing clan and kinship ties. Among the remains of a campfire, A cluster of charred bones told a tale of survival and sacrifice. Fragments of reindeer, ribs mingled with bird bones, and fish scales, the remains of a feast shared in harsh conditions. A moment of warmth and sustenance beneath a sky filled with swirling auroras and the distant call of wolves. The fire that had once burned bright was now extinguished, but its memory smoldered in the cold earth beneath the ice. Archaeologists found rune stones half buried in moss and ice, their inscriptions faded but still legible to those who studied the ancient scripts. Each rune a symbol carrying power and meaning, invoking protection, guidance, and connection to the divine. The stones marked sacred spaces or commemorated the deeds of ancestors, their placement deliberate as part of rituals. Linking the living to the spirits of land and sea, in some hidden crevices, small piles of offerings lay, untouched gifts left to honor gods and spirits, or to seek favor in times of uncertainty. Weapons crafted with exquisite detail, pieces of jewelry shaped with symbolic care, and tokens of daily life, all preserved as if time itself had frozen the hands that placed them, their purpose mysterious yet potent, bridging the world of the seen and unseen. The cold silence held more than relics. It carried the weight of human emotion, loss, longing, hope, and fear, embedded in every fragment recovered from the ice. The traces of laughter shared around campfires, the whispered prayers uttered in darkness. The steely resolve forged in the face of relentless winter, these were the true treasures uncovered beneath. The frost, not gold or silver, but the spirit of a people resilient and complex, whose stories had waited patiently beneath the ice to be told again. The glaciers continued their slow retreat, revealing new secrets with each melting season, expanding the known boundaries of Viking life and death, challenging historians to rethink myths and legends passed down through generations. What was once dismissed as fantasy or exaggeration now took shape in bone, wood, and stone, forming a more nuanced picture of a civilization, intimately connected to the harsh but beautiful landscapes they inhabited. These discoveries invited reflection on the relationship between humans and environment, on how survival depended not only on strength and courage, but also on adaptation knowledge passed from parent to child and respect for forces beyond human control. The ice became both adversary and protector, a keeper of secrets and witness to passage of time, marking slow transformation of cultures and enduring power of memory. As the sun traced low arcs across the sky in these high northern realms, the light caught on shards of ice, like scattered stars, illuminating remains of a world long vanished, but never truly lost. The Vikings beneath the ice spoke through these fragments, calling across the centuries to those who would listen, urging deeper understanding of history and humanity itself, reminding us that beneath cold and silence lies a warmth born from connection and remembrance. The ancient wind still moves through the valleys, carrying whispers of stories untold and echoes of footsteps long faded. It weaves through the bones of trees and dances across icy plains, reminding us that even in the harshest places, life and memory endure. And so the story continues unfolding, slowly like melting glaciers themselves, each new fine thread weaving past into present, binding us to lives of those who walked before us, beneath the same sky, faced the same storms, and dreamed the same dreams of survival, honor, and belonging, in a world defined by both beauty and brutality, forever preserved in the embrace of ice. Long past whispers that spoke of a people both fierce and fragile. In these stark northern realms, where daylight wanes for months, and the stars burn cold but steady, the saga of the Vikings continues, not in thunderous battle cries or roaring feasts, but in quiet echoes that drift through crystal clear air and seep slowly from the melting glaciers, beneath the frozen earth, beneath sheets of ice that cloak mountains and valleys, beneath frozen tundra and silent fjords, the Vikings endure. Etched in bone and wood, in rusted iron and woven wool, in fragile threads of memory and material. Theirs is a story still unfolding, revealed in delicate fragments brought to light by slow retreat. Of glaciers, in patient work of archaeologists and historians, piecing together a past both familiar and strange, each new discovery is a thread in vast tapestry of a civilization balanced between worlds of fire and frost, of myth and reality, of human frailty and enduring spirit. The ice has preserved more than weapons and tools. It has preserved the lives of men and women, their joys and fears, Their daily rituals and sacred rites. One such story began long ago in Hidden Valley, where a group of travelers made camp beneath towering cliffs. The cold was unrelenting, yet they pressed on, driven by purpose known only to them. They left behind traces: a small fire pit with blackened stones, charred bones from shared meal of reindeer and fish, a broken bone needle, and scraps of woolen cloth stained by time. These relics tell of a journey halted by fate, or choice perhaps, a hunting party caught by sudden winter storms, their footprints swallowed by snow, their stories waiting to be told. Nearby, a child's shoe was found, carefully crafted from softened leather, stitched with sinew worn thin from running across frozen meadows. Beside it lay a small wooden comb, its teeth broken, yet still telling of grooming and care of daily life beyond the saga and the sword. Remnants of life where art met survival, where every stitch and carving spoke of hands. Skilled in both, the cold silence of these caves held echoes of songs sung softly, perhaps lullabies or ancient prayers carried on northern winds. Voices lost but not forgotten, carried beneath layers of frost and stone. The remains of meals shared beneath auroras dancing in night. Sky fragments of bone mingled with burnt wood and ash tell tales of moments stolen from harsh landscapes. Their presence, a bridge between living and spirits of land and sea. Small piles of offerings left in crevices speak of faith and hope. Gifts to gods and spirits, weapons, jewelry, tokens of daily life, all preserved as if frozen by time itself. This cold embrace holds more than relics. It holds the weight of human emotion, loss, longing, hope, and fear, etched into every fragment recovered. The steely resolve, forged in face of relentless winter, these are the treasures uncovered beneath the frost. Not gold or silver, but spirit of a people resilient and complex, whose stories have waited patiently beneath ice to be told. Again, as glaciers retreat, secrets come to light, expanding known boundaries of Viking life and death-challenging myths and legends passed down. What once seemed fantasy now takes shape in bone, wood, and stone, forming a more nuanced picture of civilization. Intimately connected to harsh but beautiful landscapes, discoveries invite reflection on relationship between humans and environment, on survival, requiring strength, courage, adaptation, and respect. Knowledge passed from parent to child, forces beyond human control. Ice is both adversary and protector, keeper of secrets, witness to passage of time, marking transformation of cultures, enduring power of memory. Sun traces low arcs across sky in high northern realms. Light catches on shards of ice, like scattered stars, illuminating remains of world long vanished, but never lost. Vikings beneath ice speak through fragments, calling across centuries, urging deeper understanding of history and humanity itself. Beneath cold and silence lies warmth born from connection and remembrance. Story unfolds slowly like melting glaciers, each find a thread weaving past into present, binding us to lives of those who walked before beneath same sky, faced same storms, dreamed same dreams of survival, honor, and belonging, forever preserved in embrace of ice. This legacy is written not only in great battles and voyages, but in quiet acts and the crafting of tools. The Vikings were people like us, fragile and fierce, mortal, yet enduring their lives entwined with the land and sea. Around them, their spirits still wandering through the snowdrifts and fjords. And so we listen to the whispers carried on the northern wind. We watch the ice slowly give up its secrets. And in that patient unveiling, we find the human story beneath the legend. For beneath the ice lies not only the past, but a mirror too, the same endless northern sky. But beyond the artifacts and frozen remains, there lies a deeper understanding of Viking life, a connection to nature that was both reverent and necessary. The forests they harvested, the seas they sailed, the animals they hunted, the stones they shaped, all part of a world where survival meant respect for the balance of life. Their boats carved with skill to glide over cold waters, their homes built strong to withstand biting winds and snow, their clothes woven thick to guard against frostbite and storm. Each object tells a story of resilience and adaptation of a people who lived in harmony with the harsh but beautiful land. The rhythm of their lives followed the cycles of seasons, planting and harvesting when the earth allowed hunting and gathering, in times of plenty, preparing and preserving when scarcity came. Their beliefs intertwined with the environment, gods and spirits embodied in elements around them, thunder and lightning, as the voice of Thor, the sea, as the realm of Aegir, the earth as sacred mother and giver of life. In every ritual, every song, every carved rune, there was an acknowledgement of forces greater than themselves. They understood the fragility of life in frozen lands and faced each day with courage and hope. Even in times of hardship, when crops failed, or seas were stormy when enemies threatened, or winter lingered long, the Viking spirit endured. They told tales not only of conquest, but of love and loss, of kinship and loyalty, of forging community in the face of cold isolation. Their sagas preserve these human truths. Today, as we uncover their world beneath ice and earth, of people striving to live fully, to leave their mark, to be remembered as glaciers continue to melt and reveal new fragments of the Viking past. We are reminded to listen closely to the whispers carried on Arctic winds, to the silence beneath the frost, to the stories waiting patiently to be told. For in their stories lie lessons for us all of resilience, of adaptation, of connection to land and to one another, between memory and hope. Beneath the same stars, beneath the same sky, we stand connected to those who came before and to those who will follow. In the embrace of the ice, their voices still call soft but unyielding, echoing through the vastness, inviting us to remember, to understand, to belong forevermore. The cold northern winds sweep across rugged landscapes, where mountains rise like ancient monuments and forests whisper secrets only the patient dare hear. Here in the lands of ice and stone, where daylight fades swiftly into long winter nights, the story of power unfolds, not with loud clamor, but with quiet acts of loyalty and unspoken bonds. Across endless tundra and jagged cliffs, the land itself demands resilience and respect no ruler could command with mere force alone. For survival depended on alliances built like sturdy timber halls, strong enough to endure the harshest storms. In the Viking Age, the notion of kingship was not one of absolute rule, but a delicate balance of respect, allegiance, and kinship. The throne was less a seat of solitary power and more a symbol of collective identity woven deeply into the fabric of tribes and families. Each chieftain was bound not just by blood, but by stories, told around crackling fires, stories that wove ancestors to descendants' honor, to obligation, and warriors to the women and children who kept the hearths alive. Great halls stood at the center of these communities, built from timber and adorned with carvings of gods and beasts. Monuments of wood and stone, their beams darkened by smoke and time within these halls. The chieftains held court, their voices steady as they settled disputes, heard the grievances of kin and stranger alike, and forged alliances that would hold the fragile peace together. The air inside hummed, with low conversation, the scrape of wooden benches, and the soft clinking of drinking horns. These were places where power was exercised, not with harsh commands, but with wisdom and ceremony. Power in the north was not seized by force alone, though strength in battle was essential. It was earned through generosity and wisdom, through the gift of feasts and the fair sharing of spoils. For a leader who hoarded wealth or honor risked losing the loyalty of those who followed. A leader's reputation was the foundation of his rule. For loyalty was never demanded, but given, and it could shift like the tides of the stormy seas. The eyes of kin and allies watched keenly, measuring every act of justice and mercy, every feast and every gift bestowed. Among the tribes, loyalty flowed like the rivers in spring, sometimes calm and steady, other times turbulent and unpredictable. The bonds of family were paramount, and alliances often sealed by marriages and oaths sworn beneath watchful eyes of gods. These alliances were living things, growing strong with shared hardship and fading with neglect. The trust between clans and chieftains often carried the weight of generations, and was the difference between war and peace. The saga of Harald Fairhair offers one such tale, a story of a man who united scattered clans not just through conquest, but through careful diplomacy. His rise was a slow weaving of trust and power, a thread pulled taut across fjords and valleys. Harald's path to kingship was paved with battles, but also with wisdom. He knew that a throne built on fear was as fragile as ice in spring, so he cultivated loyalty through gifts and feasts. He listened to the counsel of wise men and women and honored traditions that connected the people to their gods and ancestors. Yet the throne was always precarious, challenged by rival chieftains. Ambitious for their own glory, blood feuds simmered beneath the surface of politics. Echoing through generations with tales of vengeance and honor, these feuds were not mere quarrels, but powerful forces shaping history. Cycles of violence and reconciliation bound communities, and warriors carried the weight of ancestral grievances. Some battles were fought to avenge slights to family honor, others to secure land and resources vital for survival. The loyalty of warriors was a treasure. Beyond gold, for these men followed their lords not only for wealth, but for honor and a sense of belonging. The bond between a chieftain and his warriors was sacred, for it held the tribe together through hardship and battle. These warriors bore the scars of countless raids and skirmishes, their swords and shields a testament to survival. Their loyalty was sealed not by contract, but by blood and oaths sworn on holy relics beneath the watching eyes of gods. Feasts were more than celebrations, they were the lifeblood of social order, where oaths were sworn over horns of mead and disputes dissolved in laughter and song. Here power was displayed in generosity and alliances reinforced through shared stories. These gatherings were a tapestry of sound and color. The crackle of fire mingled with the melody of lyres. The rich aroma of roasted meats filled the air, and stories of gods and heroes echoed through the night. Yet beneath the warmth of the hearth and the joy of the feast lay the constant awareness of danger. For power was never static. The shifting alliances and fierce rivalries made the political landscape as wild and unpredictable as the northern seas. To lead was to navigate this treacherous terrain, to balance strength with kindness, fear with respect, and to remember that the throne was not a prize to be hoarded, but a responsibility to be borne with care. A chieftain's wisdom lay in knowing when to wield the sword and when to offer the hand, to recognize that loyalty could be fragile, yet fierce. Like the ice that both protected and threatened these lands, the loyalty that bound tribes and thrones was fragile, yet fierce like the ice that both protected and threatened these lands, and it shaped a world where power was deeply human, a reflection of ties forged in blood and shared fate. As night falls over the fjords and stars, shimmer cold and distant, the stories of these rulers and their followers linger whispered on the wind, waiting to be heard. Again, beyond the battles and feasts lay the everyday moments, the trust placed in kin who guarded homesteads while warriors roamed, the quiet words spoken in shadows of the great halls, the prayers offered in solitude before gods unseen but deeply felt. Power was measured not only by conquest, but by care, by the ability to hold a fractured world together, to be a beacon in the dark. Northern winter, the legacy of these kings and chieftains is carved not only in stone, but in the hearts of descendants who carry their stories forward. Theirs is a power born of loyalty, earned and returned to promises, kept beneath cold northern skies. And so as the wind sweeps over mountains and fjords, and the cold stars watch silently, the saga of power and loyalty continues to echo, reminding us of a world where thrones were held, not by might alone, but by the fragile bonds of trust and kinship. The northern landscape was vast and unforgiving a land, where survival required not only strength of body, but strength of heart and mind. Among the Vikings, power was never simple. It flowed through complex networks of family ties, oaths sworn under the pale glow of the moon, and alliances forged in fire and blood within the scattered fjords and rolling hills. Tribes lived in a delicate balance, each chieftain a guardian of his people's honor, each clan fiercely protective of its lands and traditions. The chieftains held sway over their followers, not through fear alone, but through example and counsel. They were warriors, yes, but also judges and diplomats, keepers of law and arbiters of peace. The delicate dance of politics in these lands often unfolded away from the battlefield in quiet halls, where words were chosen as carefully as swords, where a glance or a gesture could mean the difference between lasting peace and brutal war feuds were common and deadly. Yet so too were moments of reconciliation and kinship. For the Vikings understood the power of mercy, the strength found in forgiveness and renewed loyalty. Rivalries between tribes could stretch back generations. Ancient grievances passed from father to son, each battle fought in memory of those before. But even in the darkest feuds, there was room for honor rules that governed combat and conduct lines that should not be crossed. Lest the gods turn their faces away, the loyalty of warriors was not lightly given. It was earned through courage on the battlefield, through fair treatment in times of peace, and through the promise of glory and remembrance. Warriors pledged themselves to their chieftain, knowing that their lives and reputations were bound together. They shared in the spoils of raids and the sorrow of loss, their bonds forged in fire and bloodshed. Yet loyalty was more than a contract of battle. It was a sacred trust, a promise to stand together. Through the endless northern winters, to protect kin and homeland alike, marriage was another bond of power and loyalty. Clans intertwined through unions carefully arranged, strengthening alliances and weaving a web of kinship that stretched across valleys and fjords. A chieftain's choice of bride could seal peace between rival families or provoke new rivalries born of jealousy and ambition. These marriages were often marked by grand celebrations, feasts that lasted days, where mead flowed like rivers and songs filled the halls, and the weaving of stories reaffirmed the ties that bound. But beneath the grandeur lay the reality of every day. Life where loyalty was tested not only by battle or marriage, but by the ability to provide for one's people to ensure the safety of the village, to lead with wisdom and strength. The harsh northern winters were a constant trial, a reminder that power was as fragile as the ice beneath one's feet. A chieftain who failed to protect his people, who hoarded resources or showed weakness, risked losing not only respect, but his very life. The weight of leadership was heavy, a burden borne in silence, for even the greatest rulers knew that their thrones rested on shifting. Sands of loyalty and fear stories passed down through generations speak of leaders who ruled wisely, who balanced strength with compassion, and whose names were remembered long after their halls fell silent. Yet for every wise ruler, there were those consumed by ambition, hungry for power beyond their means, their reigns marked by bloodshed and betrayal, their names whispered with fear and sorrow. The sagas tell of battles not only fought with sword and axe, but with words and wiles of chieftains, who outmaneuvered rivals through cunning and diplomacy and others. Undone by their own hubris, these tales reveal a world where power was never secure, where loyalty was a treasure, as precious as gold and as fleeting as the northern light. The power of the throne was tied to the land itself, to the mountains and rivers and forests that shaped the lives of those who lived there. To rule was to be a steward of the earth and its people, to protect sacred sites and honor the spirits of the land and sea, to maintain balance between the mortal and the divine. The gods watched over these lands, their favor sought through sacrifice and ritual, and the will of the people reflected in the fate of their leaders. The social order was upheld by customs older than memory, by laws spoken aloud in great assemblies, and by oaths sworn in blood and fire. Chieftains gathered in wing assemblies where free men met to debate laws, resolve disputes, and decide matters of war and peace. Here the voice of the people could sway the fate of kings, and the fragile threads of loyalty could be rewoven or broken. It was a world of paradoxes, where strength met diplomacy, where violence intertwined with mercy, and where the harshness of nature was met with the warmth of community. Power in the north was a living thing, shaped by the winds and waves, by the hearts of men and women bound together in a dance of trust and challenge. As winter's grip tightened and the days grew short, the bonds of loyalty were tested anew, for in the long dark nights, stories were shared around flickering fires, songs sung to remember those who came before, and oaths renewed beneath the watchful gaze of the gods. In this way, the cycle of power and loyalty turned an unending story, written in blood and breath, in the rise and fall of thrones and tribes. And so, as the northern lights danced across the sky and the cold stars shimmered in the endless night, the saga of the Vikings' power continues to unfold, a tale not only of kings and warriors, but of a people bound by loyalty and the fragile beauty of trust beneath the vast skies, where the auroras painted curtains of green and violet. The life of the North thrived in a delicate web of connection and conflict. Each clan was a living story, a tapestry woven from threads of honor, courage, and kinship. The lands they called home were harsh and demanding a place, where mountains carved the horizon and rivers carved the earth. Here, every decision weighed heavy with consequence for the survival of a tribe. Depended on more than just strength. It depended on wisdom, on knowing when to wield the sword, and when to extend the hand, on understanding the rhythms of the seasons. And the moods of the gods' power was held in many forms, not only in the might of arms, but in the words spoken beneath. The great halls and the sharing of food and drink, and the passing of stories and laws from one generation to the next. Chieftains were expected to embody these qualities, to be fierce in battle, yet fair in judgment, generous in giving, yet shrewd in counsel, their presence a beacon to their people in times of peril and peace. The bonds that tied a chieftain to his followers were sacred, built on trust and respect, for a leader who ruled without these was soon cast down, his name forgotten in the whispering winds. These bonds extended beyond the battlefield and the hall into the very fabric of daily life, where kinship and community shaped identity and destiny. Families were the heart of Viking society, clans often tracing their lineage back to legendary heroes and gods, their histories told in songs and poems passed down through the ages. These stories were more than entertainment. They were lessons in loyalty and virtue, reminders of the ideals that held the tribe together in times of peace. The clans came together in gatherings called things where disputes were settled and decisions made. Where the strength of words was tested against the weight of tradition, these assemblies were democratic in spirit. Free men had the right to speak and be heard, their voices shaping the laws that governed them all. Yet beneath this order lay the ever-present threat of violence, for the North was a land where grudges were kept like treasured. Heirlooms and vengeance could span generations. Feuds could erupt over the smallest insult or the deepest betrayal, leading to raids and battles that left scars on the land and the people. But even amidst this turbulence, there were moments of grace and reconciliation, where enemies became allies and new bonds were forged, for the Vikings knew that survival required both strength and mercy. The loyalty of warriors was a cornerstone of Viking culture. These men were not mere soldiers, but companions, bound by honor and shared fate. Their courage in battle was matched by their fidelity in peace. To follow a chieftain into battle was to accept the risks of death and glory, but also to claim a place in the stories that would outlive them. All these warriors were often rewarded with treasures and land symbols of their valor and the esteem of their leader. Yet their greatest reward was the knowledge that their deeds would be remembered, that their names would live on in the sagas. Told by skalds around flickering fires, marriage played a crucial role in consolidating power and loyalty. Unions were carefully arranged to link clans and secure alliances women often wielded. Subtle yet significant influence in these negotiations. A chieftain's wife could be a key player in maintaining peace, her family ties a bridge between rival factions. Her counsel sought in times of uncertainty. Festivals and feasts marked these unions. Celebrations where music and poetry flourished, and the bonds of kinship were renewed with joy and solemnity. But leadership was not without its challenges, for the cold northern winters tested the mettle of even the strongest chieftains. When food was scarce and the winds howled like ghosts through the valleys, the true measure of power was revealed. A leader who could provide and protect, who could inspire loyalty and courage, was revered and followed through hardship. But those who failed were swiftly cast aside their fall, a reminder of the fragile nature of power. Stories of great chieftains often reflect this harsh reality. Tales of rise and fall, of glory and ruin woven into the fabric of Viking history. In these stories, the throne was never simply a seat of power, but a heavy mantle of responsibility, a role that demanded wisdom, courage, and an unyielding spirit. And so the dance of power and loyalty continued, a story as old as the mountains and as enduring as the sea, where every choice echoed across generations and every bond was tested by the relentless northern winds. As the auroras shimmered overhead and the stars kept their silent watch, the saga of the Vikings' power and loyalty breathed on, a testament to a people shaped by the land and bound by the unbreakable ties of kin and clan. In the end, the true legacy of the North was not found in the spoils of war, but in the strength of its communities, in the courage of its leaders, and in the enduring power of loyalty itself. The northern realms were a place where time moved slowly and purposefully, like the heavy clouds that drifted across the wintry sky. Here, in the heartlands of the old clans, power was not merely the act of ruling, but the art of enduring. To be a leader among the tribes of the North was not to sit atop a golden throne, but to walk a fragile path between tradition and ambition, between memory and change. The thrones of the North were carved not just from wood or stone, but from stories, stories that shaped the past and whispered guidance for the future. Each chieftain knew that his seat was built upon layers of memory, not merely his own deeds, but the legends of those who came before. His hall was a living monument, echoing with the names of ancestors, where warriors sat under beams blackened by decades of fire, and where every shield on the wall bore the mark of a saga remembered. This ancestral awareness was more than sentiment. It was a code. To be powerful in the North was to be a steward of memory, a guardian of loyalty, and a practitioner of deep patience. Power was never swift here. It crept slowly like moss on stone. Alliances had to be nurtured like a fire in winter, never left to die, always fed with quiet acts of trust. Feasts served not merely food, but purpose. A single smile from a rival, a nod from a neighboring clan's envoy, could signal the birth of an agreement that might take years to mature. And in this world, the unseen was often more important than the spoken. Silence between two leaders could mean more than words. A shared drink could carry the weight of a treaty. The The tribal structure of the North operated on this silent rhythm. At its heart was the thing, the gathering of free men. Unlike the courts of faraway kingdoms where decisions were issued from above, here judgment came from the collective. Chieftains presided, but they did not dictate. Men spoke their grievances. Their disputes aired before peers, and justice was a consensus, not an order. This gave the people a voice, and in turn, gave their loyalty depth. When warriors pledged themselves to a leader, they did so not because he had gold or strength alone, but because he carried their stories with him. Their victories were his, and his failures were shared. They followed him because he stood with them in the shield wall, not apart from it. This shared fate forged bonds stronger than chains. A leader who dined with his warriors, who bled with them, and who honored the old customs, held a power that armies could not defeat. And yet, all power was temporary. Even the greatest chieftains knew that their time would pass like the long, sunlit evenings of summer. Death did not frighten them, but dishonor did. To die without glory, to lead without respect, was a fate worse than death. And so their every act, every alliance, every battle, every feast, was measured against the silent weight of legacy. The inheritance of leadership was rarely simple. Sons did not automatically take the place of their fathers. A new chieftain had to prove himself, had to earn the loyalty of those his father once led. This often meant walking into fire, either metaphorically or quite literally. There were challenges to be accepted, trials to be overcome, and eyes watching his every step. The people remembered, always, and they judged not only the man but the story he carried. In this culture, power was personal. There was no faceless government, no distant king who ruled by decree. The people knew their leaders, had shared bread with them, seen them in battle, grieved beside them at funerals. This closeness meant that betrayal was not merely political, it was a wound in the fabric of the tribe. Treachery could unravel everything, and so trust was guarded, slowly given, and fiercely protected. There were moments in northern history when the bonds held strong, when tribes united against foreign threats or internal disorder. The threat of Christian expansion, for instance, often forced chieftains who otherwise warred with each other to stand together. But such unity was always temporary. The North cherished its independence too deeply. Loyalty was to clan, to kin, to tradition, not to an abstract empire. And yet, the desire for unity sometimes whispered through the land. Men like Harold Fairhair dreamed of one king beneath the northern stars. But to make that dream real required more than iron. It required imagination. Harold succeeded not because he conquered, but because he convinced. He journeyed, spoke, offered gifts, married daughters, swore oaths, and humbled his pride when needed. It was not strength that won him loyalty, but respect. And even then, many clans remained proudly autonomous, clinging to their own stories. As the generations passed, the stories deepened. The sagas of these leaders became songs. The halls echoed with tales not only of great deeds, but of wise compromises, noble sacrifices, and quiet courage. The people remembered the chieftain who gave away his finest horse to settle a quarrel, the leader who stood alone between two feuding families until they laid down their weapons. These were acts of true power in the North, moments when leadership was not domination, but dignity. The women of the tribes also shaped this world. While they did not sit on thrones, they often influenced who did. Marriages were politics, and a wise woman could change the course of history with a well-timed word or a carefully arranged union. Matriarchs preserved the memory of the tribe, maintained the lineages, and raised the next generation of warriors and leaders. Their power was quiet, but never small. As winter came and the land froze over, the people drew inward, not only physically, but socially. These long nights were foretelling stories, reinforcing identity, and remembering who they were. In the flicker of firelight, the past came alive. Young boys listened wide-eyed as their elders recounted the deeds of their ancestors. Girls memorized the names of their foremothers, whose wisdom shaped the clan's strength. In these stories, power was passed on, not with swords, but with words. And so the throne of the North was never a thing one could simply take. It had to be lived into, shaped slowly by trust and time. It had to be deserved, and even then, it was always a burden, one carried with humility and grace, for in the end, no leader ruled alone. Every chieftain stood atop a foundation of loyalty, of stories shared, of sacrifices remembered. As the night deepens and the frost settles gently on the earth, one can still imagine the halls aglow with firelight, the laughter of warriors, the singing of old songs, the clinking of horns. Somewhere, a chieftain leans back in his chair, knowing that tomorrow will bring another choice, another test, another step along the narrow path of power. And outside, in the cold silence, the mountains stand watching. Timeless witnesses to a people who believed that power without loyalty was nothing, and that the true strength of a tribe lay not in its weapons, but in its heart. And now, dear listener, as we come to the final stretch of our long, quiet walk through the snow-dusted memory of the North, let us rest beside the great fire at the heart of the hall, where stories have always found their way home. Let us sit a while in the warmth, where flickers of gold light dance on carved beams above, and shadows stretch long across thick fur carpets and heavy wooden benches. For the tale is drawing to its final hush, and the last embers of the saga glow gently in the coals. We are at the end of this chapter, but not the end of the journey, for in the lands of frost and fir tree, in the mountains that cradle the clouds, and in the meadows where the fjord mist settles like a sleeping spirit, the stories never truly end. They wait, they rest, they breathe, they live in the silence between footsteps, in the crunch of ice beneath the boots of wandering memory. They curl in the smoke above old rooftops and linger in the timbers of homes built by calloused hands long gone. As the people of the North laid down their swords and spears and gathered their cloaks tighter against the wind, they understood more than anyone that power was not in crowns or castles, not in the clang of iron or roar of conquest. It was in trust earned slowly across many seasons and many fires. It was in the gentle passing of a ladle from one hand to another, the nod of silent understanding across a crowded hall, the way one voice would lower and all others would follow without command. It was in the silent bond between a chieftain and his people, between a warrior and his oath brother, between a mother and the child. She sang to sleep while the snow whispered outside the door, while frost etched patterns on the wooden shutters, and the wolves cried to the moon on distant hills. On the soft enduring weight of tradition carried forward from father to son, from elder to youth, through dark winters and glowing midsummers, through lean years and years of plenty, through storm and thaw and quiet summer rain. Here the throne was not a gilded chair, but a place at the table where wisdom was shared in quiet voices over bowls of hot broth, where disputes were settled not with decree, but with reason, where leadership was not shouted, but felt in the quiet. Strength of example in the patient decision, in the long memory of justice. In this world, power moved like a river, calm on the surface and deep beneath its currents, and to stand at its edge was to understand that time did not forget, and that the old ways remained alive in each action, in each vow, in each story, passed down in the scratches on a shield, the patterns on a spindle, the fading markings on an old runestone. The tribes remembered the great raids, yes, the battles and voyages and storms at sea, but they also remembered the harvest moon and the songs sung to the land. They remembered the scent of bread rising on hearthstone and the way one person could change. Everything with a kind word and steady heart. They remembered the names of animals and winds, the shape of clouds that told of snow, the way a child laughed and the world felt lighter. They remembered the laughter of children chasing goats through high mountain pastures and the tears shed quietly by elders as another name was carved into stone beside the fjord. They remembered the first time. The snow fell each year, and the way the cold sharpened every sense, reminding them that they were alive. And part of something older and deeper than words could hold, they remembered the strength of gathering around one fire, the sharing of stories that made them one people under one sky. They remembered the frostbitten days when wood smoke curled slowly into the gray sky and the crunch of boots. Echoed on frozen earth, the quiet mornings where breath clouded in the air, and ravens, perched on rooftops, watching the world with dark, knowing eyes. The hush after snowfall, when the land seemed to hold its breath, and all things were soft and clean and eternal. They remembered the long nights where voices rose in harmony, the songs layered like woolen blankets wrapped around the soul, each note a tribute to love, to loss, to hope, to the resilience that shaped the people who endured not. Through conquest, but through constancy, through holding tight, through letting go, through speaking only when words mattered most. The children learned the names of stars by sitting beneath blankets beside their elders who pointed skyward, tracing shapes that held stories and lessons and warnings. They learned that the sky itself was a living memory, a record of everything that had come before, and everything that might still be. They learned from the quiet strength of their grandmothers, from the calloused hands of their fathers, from the laughter that echoed across frost-kissed meadows. They learned that bravery was not always battle, that wisdom was not always age, that love was not always loud, but it was always there, like the steady flame of a hearth. And so the North endured. The wind still swept across the valleys, and the stars still rose over frozen fields. The ancient gods were still spoken of in hush and wonder, and the name of each ancestor still carried the weight of 1,000 winters. Fires still burned in longhouses where songs were sung not for glory, but for remembrance, and children learned not from scrolls, but from tales carried on the breath of old, written not with ink, but with action. Even the tools of daily life became sacred, the wooden spoon worn smooth by 100 winters, the carved cup passed down from one hand to the next, the woven basket that had carried roots and berries through 3 generations. Each item a story, each object a legacy, each breath drawn in a longhouse carried the memory of laughter, of grief, of endurance, of love that asked for nothing in return. There was no silence in the North that was empty. Every stillness held echoes of the past. Every hush was full of listening. Every shadow was watched over by those who had walked the land before. Now, as our tale grows still, as the snow outside falls quieter, as the light of the fire fades and our eyes grow heavy, who once ruled not by fear, but by faith, by presence, by patience, by the grace of knowing when to speak and when to simply listen, let us drift gently into sleep with their voices. Like distant echoes carried on the wind, not lost, but waiting, always waiting in the quiet. They do not rush, they are never far. They wait in the corners of the night, in the spaces between dreams, in the silence that holds meaning. For in the North, nothing is truly gone, only resting, only waiting to be remembered once more. Let your mind linger on the frost-kissed halls and the flickering warmth of shared memory. Let your breath fall slowly and your body soften into stillness. Let the hush of the story settle into your bones like snow upon an old roof, like moss upon ancient stone. Let your dreams walk the icy trails where wolves once howled and sleigh bells once rang through the silence of pine. Let them cross frozen rivers where lanterns flickered and men with thick cloaks leaned on spears watching the sky. Let them pass down shadowed paths where once the whisper of a vow echoed louder than any sword. Let them visit the quiet graves of the forgotten and offer them silence. Let them hear the old lullabies sung again beneath the stars. Let yourself rest in the knowledge that this world once was, that this fire once burned, that this love once held generations in its arms, as the wind howled outside and the cold gathered at the door. For in those moments in the hush between night and dawn, something sacred lingers, a heartbeat, a hush, a memory of stillness and of the dignity carried by those who chose peace over power, who chose community over command, who chose memory over might. They did not vanish, they became the wind, the flame, the silence between verses, the knowing in the eyes of an old man who has seen too many winters and still smiles with kindness. They became the voice behind your breath when you tell the tale. They became the warmth in your hands when you hold another. They became the story itself. So let go now. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your breath grow slow. Let the North carry you gently into the deepest sleep, where stars turn slow and the great mountains watch in stillness, where the gods remember you and the ancestors welcome you, where the earth holds your name as softly as it held your steps. And so the story ends not with a battle cry, but with a whisper and a final breath beneath the stars. Good night, rest well, and dream of the old North, where thrones were built not of gold, but of honor, and where the cold winds carried only truth and silence and sleep.